to kick us off with a first-person address, we are honored to have, all the way from New York, Ed Moloney, one of the most distinguished, challenging, principled of Troubles journalists, who is going to talk to us about the Boston College project, which is often overlooked in technical discussions about operational security and source protection, but it's of huge importance, I think, to all of us. Ed.
Since the theme of this year's Logan Symposium is conspiracy, it would be churlish of me not to entertain you with a story about an event which I have come to suspect was a conspiracy, which touched my own life, and not in a pleasant way, as is often the case with such matters. Conspiracies are devilishly difficult to prove, but that does not mean they do not happen. As some of you may know, I was involved in the creation in 2001 of an oral history archive on the Troubles in Northern Ireland, along with Boston College's Burns Library. We were inspired by a similar project carried out by the Irish government, which interviewed veterans of the period between the Easter Rising of 1916 and the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921. There was an element of urgency attached to our project. The Troubles in Northern Ireland had lasted over 3 decades compared to the 5 years of the Anglo-Irish conflict. With activists aging, time was not on our side. So BC, that's Boston College, provided the money, and we began with a program of interviews of Republican activists. Next, we turned our attention to the Ulster Volunteer Force, or UVF. Between them, the Provers and the UVF had done the bulk of the killings, shootings, and bombings of the Troubles. And there were plans to extend, eventually, the archive to the police and the army. For interviewers, we recruited academically qualified people who either through former paramilitary membership or family connections knew the subject well, and most importantly, would be trusted by the interviewees. Confidentiality and secrecy were at a premium. All went well enough until 2006, 2007, when Boston College decided it was time to change the terms of the deal. Unless we agreed that interviews should be published now as opposed to after the deaths of the interviewees, which we had agreed, then BC would stop funding the project. We turned them down, BC turned off the money spigot, and that was the end of the project. Fast forward 5 years, and an article appeared in a tabloid Sunday newspaper in Belfast claiming that its reporter had been given access to the interviews given by one of our interviewees, a former IRA bomber called Dolores Price, who had allegedly told BC that in 1972 she had driven a woman called Jean McConville to her death. Jean McConville, a widowed mother of 10 from the Divis Flats area of Belfast, had been accused of informing for the British Army. To cut a long story short, she was taken across the Irish border, shot dead, and buried in a secret grave. She was one of the so-called disappeared. Actually, although the account was correct, Dolores Price had said nothing of the sort in the interviews. The reporter had lied. She had decided not to include that story in her interview for Boston College, as was her right, which we respected. The disappearing of Jean McConville was an embarrassment to the RUC, the police, and the British Army. The police had ignored her death in 1972, and it was only in the 1990s, after pressure from some of her children, that they recategorized her end as murder. Equally, if she had been a military agent, the British Army faced awkward questions about their exploitation of such a vulnerable woman. The inaccurate newspaper article gave the police the opportunity to make some amends. They served subpoenas on Boston College, demanding that interviews dealing with the McConville disappearance be handed over. But the one thing they did not do was approach the reporter in Belfast who claimed to have read Dolores Price's interview and asked to read it. Eventually, after a lengthy and at times bitter court battle, during which we broke from Boston College, the PSNI, the successors of the RUC, got their way, and some interviews were handed over. At one level, that appeared to be the end of the story. The police had won a famous transatlantic legal victory, and one person was arrested and charged. But such is his mental state that it is unlikely that he will ever face a criminal trial. Except the story does not end there. The peace process had addressed many of the causes of the violence in Northern Ireland, A power-sharing assembly and executive had been created in which all parties, even the IRA's political wing, Sinn Féin, would participate. IRA and loyalist prisoners had been released from prison, and the paramilitary groups had all agreed to destroy their weapons and to recognize the law and order system. One area, though, had not been resolved, and it was arguably the most contentious of all: how to deal with the past. Everyone involved in the peace process had reasons to want to avoid dealing with this in a serious way. The IRA had killed and wounded more people than anyone, and having that record examined would be embarrassing and difficult. The Loyalists had indulged in the most savage violence of all. Their killings and torturing were reminiscent of the Deep South during the worst days of Jim Crow. But the party sitting on the most damaging secret of all was the British government, or to be specific, the intelligence agencies in the employ of the government who had fought the secret war against the IRA. Some of you may have read recently reports of a secret document that was drawn up to protect the work of intelligence agencies in Northern Ireland by MI5 in the early 1990s. It was disclosed at a legal hearing in London at the beginning of this month, and it allowed MI5 to conceal illegal acts committed by agents of the state from the prosecutor's office. The offenses involved, it was suggested, could include murder. What it really meant, lawyers will doubtless argue, was that the third direction, as the document was christened, allowed agents working for the police, army, or MI5 in Northern Ireland to commit murder in the knowledge that nothing would ever happen to them. Those of us who have covered the story in Northern Ireland have little doubt that this document was drawn up specifically to protect a senior IRA member turned British spy called Freddie Scappaticci, codenamed Steakknife, who became head of the IRA's spy-catching unit, officially known as the Internal Security Unit, or ISU. The ISU had unprecedented power in the IRA. It could go anywhere, attend any meeting, interrogate any activist, no matter how senior. Feared and hated in equal measure by the rank and file, the ISU was like a junction box with every power cable in the IRA running through it. Tap into the junction box and all would be revealed. It doesn't take much imagination to realize how valuable Freddie Scappaticci was to the spooks, how many other IRA members he enabled MI5, the special branch, or military intelligence to recruit. Put it this way, I have read compelling evidence that by the early 1990s, 1 out of every 3 IRA member was working for the British, and I'd bet Scap, as he was called, helped recruit most of them. Of course, to protect his cover, Scap had to keep on killing. He was, after all, in charge of the unit, charged with capturing and putting out of action British spies, and to do so with the approval of his handlers in Whitehall. But whatever value he had for the government, the truth is that by tolerating his activity, Freddie Scappaticci made the mandarins of Whitehall, and possibly even their political masters and mistresses, accessories to murder. Well, there is now next to no chance that the secret will be revealed to a truth-telling peace process agreed at Stormont. First of all, there has been no agreement about dealing with the past, nor any sign that there will be one. And even if there is no indication that the parties will agree on amnesty, a vital prerequisite for meaningful truth-telling. That just leaves those pesky freelance efforts by people like ourselves at Boston College. Well, it seems that the PSNI move for the college's archive has removed that problem as well. This is what Guardian and Observer Irish correspondent Henry MacDonald recently told a conference in Belfast. He and some colleagues had a project underway, inspired by the Boston College archive, to interview security personnel involved in intelligence work during the Troubles on both sides of the border. But when the PSNI subpoenas were accepted by the First Circuit Court of Appeal in Boston, the project collapsed. The phone calls came in from potential interviewees, he said. That's it, we're not doing it, it's over, take my name off the project. Academics elsewhere have reported that no one will now touch historical research of that sort into the Troubles. The PSNI move against Boston College has killed off any chance of a privately funded freelance effort to dig into Northern Ireland's murky past. The spooks in Whitehall and at the police headquarters in Belfast can breathe easily. There will be no meaningful examination of Britain's behavior during the Troubles. There's just one thing I forgot to tell you. The PSNI officer who led and directed the invasion of the archives at Boston College just happened to also be the liaison officer between the PSNI and MI5. Just a coincidence, or maybe a conspiracy? Thank you.